Yo, pass the mic over this way. I'm about to be late.
Become aware of one thing. You have everything, but you don't have yourself.
Welcome back to your 12th favorite podcast, Burnin with G.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Burnin with G, episode 7. We out here. This is my room. This painting right here, the name of it is called We Used to Live There. It's basically these two people looking at the earth from the moon, I presume. It could be like an asteroid or something, but I don't think that'd be possible. But I don't know. When I saw this tapestry, I think I saw it on Etsy or some website like that. I was like, damn, that actually very, very much resonates with me. It's very like a futuristic tapestry. So I was like, all right, perfect for my podcast. So hope you guys are all doing well. It's about to be finals week. We back out here. So I just finished this book right here called The Story of My Life by Helen Keller. So this week what I wanted to focus on was senses. So all of last week I was really, really sick. I hope it's not the coronavirus, but it was not good. And it got me thinking. I was like, when I didn't have the ability to breathe properly, that's the first time I was thinking, like, why is it that I'm not appreciative of the fact that I can smell, I can, taste everything way better when I'm okay, right? When I'm not sick, everything is just totally in my grasp, but I never really appreciate it. But as soon as you get sick, all of a sudden it's like, damn, I really miss being able to do all those things. When I was sleeping, I couldn't even breathe through my nose. I'd be breathing out my mouth. I'm like, I never really appreciated the fact that I could easily breathe through my nose when I'm not sick. So that got me thinking, like, how many things are there like that I just completely, it just goes over my head. And only if I ever get in a place where I'm about to lose it, do I actually start thinking, like, maybe that's something I should be appreciative and grateful for. So I started thinking about my senses. I have glasses, so I do understand a little bit of how having sucky eyesight is, but we have our 5 senses, and I think that's something that we never actually really appreciate and are grateful for, right? So I was like, the way I understand these things is we can only really ever get to a place of true appreciation, I feel like, if we've seen the other side, right? I think if I can ever get to a place where I'm grateful for something, even though I haven't lost it, I would be very proud of where, that person. But right now I'm not there yet. So normally after I lose something is when I really understand the value and meaning of it. So when we take our senses, for example, it's very difficult to, create some sort of experiment where you can go blind and then like for a couple weeks and then come back. I have heard of people who've went and lived in caves for like a week or two and then came out and talked about their experience with sunlight and just, appreciation of color. But I don't think I'm ready for that level of commitment yet, but I will be one day, just wait. But so for right now, I was like, okay, what is the best way I can understand the experiences of someone who's never had the ability to see? So I was like, Helen Keller, who else better? So I picked up her autobiography, and I would say crazy. So, before I start talking about it, I want to say she wrote this book when she was 23. And I think that is very, very impressive, because the fact that she was able to think like that at such a young age and just be very aware of her life and her condition, I think is really impressive and very, I'm trying to find the right word. Give me a second. Admirable. That's a way that I should have been able to recall that. So when I first got into reading this book, the main thing that I had thought about was, what is the mindset of somebody who is basically living in a cave their entire life? If you think about it, so much of our awareness of where we are, for example, comes from our hearing. And so much of the same, understanding our surrounding comes from our eyesight as well. To take both of those away at the same time puts you in this place where you never really know where you are. Like, I'll be on the airplane and I'll put on some the noise reduction headphones, right? And I don't normally wear those. My friend gave it to me, and just having it on for a couple minutes was so weird, because you never really experience true silence ever. There's always something somewhere going on. That level of true silence is just not something that's very normal. So for her to be able to have that's her entire life means that she has so much time where it's just her and her thoughts, right? When you can't distract yourself with music, or you can't distract yourself by watching something, you're just there in your head. And that's how she was her whole life. So I was very interested to also see how did she become so okay with her thoughts, right? Because in that situation, if you're not best friends with your mind, your ideas, you're gonna go pretty insane, because that's the only person talking to you. There's no one else really communicating with you, like when you talk to yourself, apart from you, because you're not hearing anything else from anyone else. So that was something I was very interested to see. How did she kind of go through that? So looking at my notes real quick, so she suffered from scarlet fever when she was 2 years old, which left her dumb, blind, and deaf. Dumb basically means you can't talk. I didn't know that actually for a long time. So this was a really interesting quote that she started out the book with that I really liked. The desire to express myself grew. The few signs I used became less and less adequate, and my failures to make myself understood were invariably followed by outbursts of passion. So here she's basically talking about when she was a child. So right after, from 2 to 6, she began her education at 6. So in those 4 years, she couldn't actually properly express any of her feelings. So she oftentimes had outbursts. She would be very upset, angry, because she literally just didn't know how to express it, right? Babies cry all the time and they don't say things in words because they don't know how to do that. And in the same way, she just lacked in that ability to express herself and say hey, this is the problem. And that started making me think just how important are our words actually, because every thought and feeling that we have stemmed from the understanding of a word to begin with. So if we take an abstract concept such as death, if we didn't have any words in our arsenal that could help us define something of, the end of life, then that thought would have never, perhaps it might have never even come to us, which I think is very beautiful, in that our relationship with words is so powerful because our thoughts and words are so intertwined. They talk about that in 1984 with doublespeak, where they would change the language a little bit so people weren't able to express certain feelings of hatred or certain feelings of anger, just because then all of a sudden those feelings itself would also be out of, they may feel it, but since they aren't able to actually explain it, they're epistemically injustice there, where they just have no idea how to talk about that. So I thought that was really cool that she was able to understand the effects that had on her from the age of 2 to 6. So she started actual education, formal education, at the age of 6, and she says that that's when her life changed. She comes across this teacher named Anne Sullivan, and this woman is a godsend. She basically stayed with Helen Keller all the way until she graduated college, and literally took her hand and helped her get through everything, and she accredits almost all of her success to her. And that made me really think how important teachers are. There could always be that one teacher that comes into your life and just changes the entire direction of it. And teaching is a cool job. That's something I'm personally just working with, because that is something I'm thinking that I eventually want to go into sooner than later. So when I read about Helen Keller's interactions with Anne, it was just really inspirational for me, because that's a type of teacher I want to be. She says this really cool quote that I really like that she says, any teacher can take a child to the classroom, but not every teacher can make them learn. And I think that's very true. So the way she actually learned almost everything is from touch. So the first step that Sullivan, I don't know if I should say the first name or second name, but let's just say second name for now. So let's just say Sullivan. So how she would teach her is Helen Keller would touch something. So let's say she touched a shoe. Then Anne Sullivan would write the word shoe on her palm. And then now in her head, she says, okay, whenever I touch this means shoe. So then she'd go up to her mom and be like, where's my shoe? She would write shoe on her hand. So it was purely through the palm, which I think is really cool. It's kind of just like texting, but on the hand. So this also taught me something very interesting, because she talks about the power of really thinking about what you have to say before you say it. Since I can basically spew infinite words at any time I want, I never really actually think about the way I talk, which is why even podcasting is such a new skill for me, because I have to actually think about what I'm saying. I can't just say whatever comes off the top of my head, because then I could be saying some, garbage. So And which is why that part of podcasting is still very hard for me to get to, and I'm still learning it. Like cutting how many times to say how many times to say really. I know you've heard me say that so many times. I say really, 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 because I can't think that quick. But she talks about how because she had to write literally every single word on someone's hand, she was very careful with what she had to actually say. So she felt like she only had enough energy and time to explain certain things, so she was very limited in what she had to say. So she got to the point very quickly, which makes you think, like, how many words am I saying that are just absolutely useless? Can I get my point across in a much more efficient way? And most of the time, yes. And that this whole process of writing it out actually got me thinking about that. So let's see what's next. So the next part of her process in learning was abstract concepts. So when you're learning everything by touch, you can't touch life, you can't touch death, you can't touch love. How do you explain these concepts? So Miss Sullivan went through this in a really interesting way. So the first abstract concept that Helen Keller ever understood was think. So as she was doing it, she had a puzzle and it was just beads, and she was trying to do too big, too small, too big, too small, and then Miss Sullivan would give different types of patterns that Helen Keller would have to do. And whenever Helen Keller would get to a point that she didn't know or she'd mess up on the pattern, Miss Sullivan would take her hand and put it on her forehead. And slowly, after multiple days of this, finally Helen Keller understood that, hey, this actually means think. She'd write the word think, and she finally that was the first abstract concept. Thinking means solving, right? And I think that idea of what abstract concepts are is just so cool. And I'm very grateful that I'm able to grasp these concepts at least so much easier than someone who had to go through that process of piecing together what these concepts mean. But the really cool thing is she must have a completely different understanding of what these concepts are from a young age, right? Where we don't really need to think about what exactly does love mean, right? We just can take what we see or what we hear from people and just kind of assume that that's correct instead of actually having to visualize it the way she had to. So she says this very interesting quote here about how the deaf and blind have a challenge when it comes to talking to people. She says, "The deaf and the blind find it very difficult to acquire the amenities of conversation. They cannot distinguish the tone of the voice or, without assistance, go up and down the gamut of tones that give significance to words, nor can they watch the expression of the speaker's face, and a look is often the very soul of what one says." For some reason, I just never went across. I never thought about that before. The fact that so much of what you have to say comes with some sort of tonality. It comes with some sort of facial expression. So for example, if you're crying, I can tell that you're sad because there's tears down your face, and whatever you have to say has a completely different connotation than if you said that exact same thing with a smile on your face, right? So she continued learning in this manner for a while. And at the age of 10, she finally switched to a different school, and the same teacher still went along with her. And this is where she started to learn how to speak. So her journey on learning how to speak is actually really cool as well. So what she would do is they would write the pronunciations of a few words like very slowly. So she started with water. She could say wawa. That was the first word she ever said. And from there, they just slowly helped her say different words. And she'd talk about how she'd practice one word for hours, and she'd just feel the vibrations until she knew that what she was saying was right. And that's how she slowly picked up learning how to speak. And she talks about how that completely speeded the way it fastened the way, is that the right word? Quickened? Alright, whatever, you know what I'm trying to say. That happened whenever she was trying to express herself. So even though the way she would receive information from others was still the same speed through writing on the hand, at least the way she would actually speak to others would be much, much faster. So this is when a very interesting situation happens in her life, which she accredits a lot of insecurities stemmed from this specific thing. So it's called the Frost King spectacle. That's what I call it, at least. So basically, she loved writing. She loved reading and she loved writing. So she used to write these little stories, and she wrote this story one time called The Frost King. She gave it to her school and they published it, and it was a big deal. Oh my god, a blind and deaf girl writes a story, and it's a really good story. A lot of people are reading it. A couple months later, another author actually emails the school, or sorry, they don't have email back then, probably lettered or like rode on a horse and told them. But she told him that that was actually her story, and it was almost plagiarized line by line. And her story is actually called The Frost Fairies, which is super funny because even the name is so close. It's really like one of those stories where it's like you turn it in, and you're like, I swear to God, I never saw that. But she genuinely was not trying to copy it. So this is when she started talking about how almost all her information and knowledge came from reading. So she started having this huge insecurity about not really knowing whether the information had actually stemmed from her own mind or whether it was just some sort of rewordage of somebody else's idea. So she said that for the longest time she was really actually insecure about coming up with any of her own ideas because she didn't know if it was just copied from someone else. And that got me thinking as well, like, how many of my ideas are really from my own head? You know, I feel like when you read a lot and you watch TV and you have all these streams of information coming at you, how much of that is actually something that you create on your own, and how much of it is just taking 20% from here, 20% there, from 20 from here, and then just kind of compiling it together, right? And that even got me thinking about this podcast as well. It's like, how much of the information is truly mine and not some sort of information that I may have received from another podcast I listen to. And I think that's very important to make sure to really understand what creativity and the act of creating is to really understand how much of your inspiration is actually guiding what you do. So after, so this whole story happened when she was 12. So she quotes, "I have ever since been tortured by the fear that what I write is not my own." So fast forward a couple of years, from 12 to 18, 17, she kind of had she was just growing. She just kept learning. She kept reading. She loved to read. She experienced stuff. She talks about how she likes canoeing and stuff. And I really am trying to imagine how somebody like that would canoe. But good for her. She really was out there. She wasn't just sitting at home. So at the age of 18, she went to college. And in college and for a couple years before, she learned 5 whole languages. That really was like that was the most mind-blowing thing to me in this entire book. It was so hard for me to learn my own language as well as Spanish in school. Like, I learned maybe like 2 words. Like, I could say, "Señor, puedo ir al baño?" That means, "Can I use the restroom?" That was about it. And this woman, blind and deaf, learned 5 whole languages fluently. There is no excuse that none of us can accomplish anything we want when there are people like her out there. So in college, she has this really cool quote that I thought, it resonated a lot with me. She says, "The one I felt and still feel the most is the lack of time. I used to have time to think, to reflect, my mind and I. But in college, there is not time to commune with one's thoughts. One goes to college to learn, it seems, not to think." So she talks about how throughout her entire childhood, she had the time to do school, but to think and just grow her ideas and be in her head more. But once she came to college, all she was doing was just reading from about school and passing tests and just that constant stress of needing to get homework done, needing to get midterms done, finals done, and not really have the time to sit there and think about what you're learning, right? Like, really think about that. Like, I learned so many cool things in my math classes, my philosophy classes, and it's like, how much time do I actually get to sit and be like, how did these guys come up with this theory, right? Instead of just like jumping quarter system, even semester, I don't know about how it goes for you guys, but for quarter system, it just goes by so quickly that I kind of just learn it. I appreciate it in the moment because I'm like, that is pretty cool. And then I never really actually get time to sit and ponder about it. And I think, and she explains that too. She was like, she feels like education system lacked for her, and she never really got that time to think and really sit with ideas. So she goes from here into talking about this really beautiful idea of reading, where she talks about the ends and means of activities. So she talks about how college basically led her to, quote unquote, lose sight of the very ends for which one reads. So her idea is that reading itself is the end. So let me reiterate that. So when I read, this is something I started realizing for the podcast. I was actually attacking the podcast from the wrong angle. I would read so I would have information for the podcast. So what becomes the end there? Not the reading itself. The end there is to have material for the podcast. Therefore, my act of actually reading is now diminished and I'm not getting that much happiness from it. When I read that line, I was like, oh my God, I need to do that. I need to shift it where the reading itself is the end. All I'm doing is just reading because reading itself is fun. And then if I happen to get any information from it, then put it on the podcast, which completely shifts it. So her idea of using reading as an end instead of a means is very important for almost everything that we do in our life, right? If we use everything as a means, we'll never be happy with that action itself. So if I learn a certain act so that I can impress others, right? I think a lot, I use that for dancing a lot for me. I don't dance well, but I enjoy dancing. And I always think if I use dancing as a means to, get somebody or be more attractive, then I'm not really actually enjoying the act of dancing it itself. But if I dance purely for dancing itself, then the end is dancing. Therefore, I purely enjoy the act of it. So I wanted to switch all the actions I do into the end itself and not some sort of means to something else. So I thought that was really cool, and that was something that resonated a lot with me. This is funny. So on my notes, I wrote in all caps, read passage page 66. Let me see what this is. Hold up. Okay, so, Okay, right here, I highlighted it. Okay, you ready for some real truth here? Let me see if... Okay. People who think that all sensations reach us through the eye and the ear have expressed surprise that I should notice any difference, except possibly the absence of pavements between walking in city streets and in country roads. They forget that my whole body is alive to the conditions about me. The rumble and roar of the city smite the nerves of my face, and I feel the ceaseless tramp of an unseen multitude, and the dissonant tumult frets my spirit. The grinding of heavy wagons on hard pavements and the monotonous clangor of machinery are all the more torturing to the nerves if one's attention is not diverted by the panorama that is always present in the noisy streets to people who can see. A 23-year-old wrote that, first of all. Crazy. Very impressive. That was a very awesome paragraph. But what she's talking about there is that there is so much to the senses than just what you can see and hear. The way your body feels, the way your skin reacts, the way everything just feels, your gut feels when you eat something, or just those feelings are also a huge part of your senses, right? And in her statement between realizing the difference between country roads and city roads, it's not just what you see or hear, but it's the way your body just reacts to it. And I think paying attention to those, I've never done it. I've literally never ever done that. So I really cannot tell you how to do it or what my experiences are with doing it, but being aware of that there's more to your body telling you how you feel than just what you see and hear is, I think, really powerful, because it shows us how adaptable our body really is. It knows what's good for you. Our body really tells us what's good for us, and we just choose to sometimes listen to it and a lot of times not. And I think that when I read that, it was like, wow, for her, because she was completely devoid of these senses, she had to rely on that, and she lived until 88. She was 88 years old when she died. So clearly your body will help you survive, right? She was blind and deaf and couldn't speak for the first couple years of her life, and she still somehow figured out how to live for that long. So I think trusting our body, understanding those senses, really appreciating everything about our body is so important, and I'm so ready to go through that journey now. So, conclusion. Let's sum up everything that I personally learned from this book. 1, we can accomplish anything, whatever we set our mind to. I was actually just talking to my friend about this yesterday. Think about our time as if we have coins, right? Like you're playing My Player on 2K, you got coins, and each coin is a minute or it's a day. And as long as you put your coins towards anything, that whatever you put your coin towards can be accomplished, as long as you put enough time, right? So all that matters is that you put your coins towards something you care about. So she was very passionate about reading. She was very passionate about learning, and she put all her time towards it, and she did it. And if she can accomplish learning 5 languages, we can as well. And I think it's just amazing what, the true potential of humans. And I keep saying this every podcast, because every time I'm amazed, every time I read a new book, the reality that I can accomplish anything I set my mind to, and we all can, is just so powerful. Because I never grew up thinking that. I always thought, okay, LeBron's the NBA player, but I'm just gonna be an average person. No, we don't have to be. If we put enough of our time coins towards something, we can also be great. That was the first thing. Second thing, I learned that I need to respect my body more and really appreciate the senses of what's going on around me. When it's cold, appreciate that your body feels that, right? When you don't just ignore everything for, for some sort of clout or for some sort of, I don't know, just that disconnect between really listening to our body, for me at least, was never really there. And I think that's something I'm working on now. Actually listening to what my body says. If I'm sore, sitting down and being like, it's okay, body, I understand you. I'm not always trying to fix it. I'm not like, before, if my knee hurt, my knee always hurts, I have a knee problem, I'd be like, God damn it, why is my knee hurting now? But that's just like creating such a toxic relationship with your body, right? But really being able to feel all those things, like your body's just speaking to you. They're like, hey, like, you got to chill a little bit on my knee so you can feel better in the future. And I think paying attention to those things is something that Helen Keller talks a lot about, and I also started understanding that we should also do that. Third thing, as I talked about earlier, focusing on the end itself instead of putting all the actions that we do as a means to an end. Allowing these actions to be the end itself will make us be a lot more present as well as happy in the action itself. And she talks a lot about how it was a lot easier for her to do that because, when she did feel some sort of feelings, it was just so overwhelming for her because she was devoid of these other two senses. So, when she did feel touch, it meant something to her. And the last one is, we are alive. Honestly, like, that's all I have to say. Like, this coronavirus stuff, this whole 2020 year has just been so much death, and from the beginning until last 2-3 months, it's just been a lot of dying that's been going on. So we're alive. Honestly, that's the biggest blessing. We can breathe. I'm healthy again. I think if I did have coronavirus, it's gone now. We can breathe, we can sleep right, we can eat, our guts are good, like, we're healthy, we can run, we can do these things, and honestly, it's a blessing. And I just want to say thank you for listening. It's getting cleaner. The view, last time we took the podcast in the dark, this time it's not. So at least you can see my face better this time. But thank you for listening. I had a great time doing this podcast. Burnin with G, we out.